You are mistaken. The words echoed through the bridge of the Concorde warship, delivered in a voice so calm, so final, it sent a chill through the High Admiral's plated spine. Admiral Zir stiffened. He had led the Warforged fleet for over 2 centuries. He had crushed rebellions before they could breathe. He had executed species that dared question Concorde rule. But tonight, he felt something he had never known before. Fear. The transmission flickered on the holopad before him. The figure was unmistakably humanoid, tall, clad in black armor that absorbed the light around it, as though even photons dared not touch the warlord standing before him. Commander Elias Kale. A name that should not exist. A species that should not exist. Zir's mandibles clicked together. You are outnumbered. His voice was steady, authoritative. Surrender, and your people will be spared. Kale exhaled a slow, measured breath. He tilted his head slightly. Surrender? His lips curled. I don't think you understand what's happening. Zir straightened. You have 1 fleet. We have 5,000 ships converging on this system. You are a relic of a forgotten war. The Concorde does not lose. Silence. Kale studied him, those cold, inhuman eyes scanning Zir's face as if peeling him apart molecule by molecule. And then, he smiled. 5,000 ships, Kale mused, voice dripping with amusement. You brought everything, didn't you? You thought this would be an extermination. His fingers tapped against the console before him. But I'll let you in on a little secret, Admiral. Zir swallowed, waiting. You didn't find us, Kale whispered. We let you see us. A pulse rippled through the comms. Zir's ship shuddered violently as alarms screamed across the bridge. His officers scrambled, mandibles clicking in panicked commands. Massive energy spike detected. Spatial anomalies forming across the system. The tactical officer's voice was a strangled gasp. Sir, they're everywhere. Zir turned sharply to the viewport. The vast expanse of space that had once been empty was no longer empty. From the void, from places the Concorde's maps had deemed dead space, hundreds, no, thousands, of ships began to emerge. Silent, black as the abyss, human warships phased into existence. They had been there the entire time. Cloaked. Hidden. Waiting. Zir's blood turned to ice. Impossible, he whispered. Kale's voice was barely audible over the rising chaos. You were never the predator, Admiral. You were the prey. Then the firing began. The first wave of human warships moved like liquid death, their weapons carving through the Concorde's unbreakable formations as if they were nothing. Concorde battleships, armed with the most advanced shielding known to the galaxy, detonated in cascading explosions. Their defenses, their countermeasures, useless. Shields are failing, a panicked officer screeched. We can't track their movements. Zir gritted his teeth, forcing down the mounting terror clawing at his mind. Redirect all primary weapons. Target their command ships. The Concorde fleets retaliated. Beams of white-hot plasma, kinetic rail slugs moving at relativistic speeds, warheads designed to shatter planets, every weapon in the Concorde's arsenal fired at once. And yet, it hit nothing. The human ships shifted, blinked, danced between dimensions like specters, their hulls untouched, unscathed. The warheads detonated on empty space. The Concorde's greatest weapons were meaningless. Kale's voice returned. Calm. Detached. Absolute. You're throwing rocks at gods, Admiral. Then the second wave arrived. Zir barely had time to comprehend what he was seeing. New human ships warped into reality at point-blank range. No warnings. No hyperspace signatures. Just instant death. In one motion, Concorde dreadnoughts were torn apart, ripped from existence before they could even register the attack. Zir's mind reeled, trying to grasp the magnitude of the slaughter. This wasn't war. This was extermination. Full retreat. He didn't care about pride anymore. This was survival. I repeat, all forces retreat. Retreat? Kale sounded amused. You still think you have a choice? Zir barely had time to turn before his ship's alarms screeched again. Something was wrong. The stars outside, they shifted. Sir, the system's collapsing. Zir's breath hitched. It wasn't just a battle. The very fabric of space itself was unraveling. A pulse, human-engineered, reality-breaking technology, rippled across the battlefield. Concorde ships began to vanish. Not destroyed. Erased. Zir grabbed the console, mandibles twitching. What have you done? Kale leaned forward. We've changed the rules. Zir turned to run. He didn't know where, he just had to move. But it was too late. A new energy signature pulsed through his ship. A singularity. Zir felt himself stretch, his atoms pulling apart. Kale's voice whispered, the last thing Zir would ever hear. You erased us from history, Admiral. But history remembers. And so do we. Zir tried to scream. Then he was gone. The battle ended in minutes. Humanity did not conquer. They did not take prisoners. They left no ruins, no wreckage. Only silence. Across the galaxy, the transmission spread. An entire armada, gone. 5,000 Concorde warships, erased. The Edrith Empire, shattered. Then, a final message. Not a threat. A promise. We were just a myth. Now, we're your reckoning. We were just a myth. Now, we're your reckoning. The transmission pulsed across the stars, a whisper of death crawling through the fractured networks of the Edrith Concorde. The silence that followed was more terrifying than the destruction itself. Every high command chamber, every governor's hall, every fleet admiral's war room, they all heard it. And none dared speak. High Chancellor Vectress stood frozen in the Imperial War Chamber, the glow of the shattered fleet flickering across the holographic displays. 5,000 ships, erased from existence. His claws trembled against the marble table, his throat tightening with something unfamiliar. Terror. 1,000 years of absolute dominion. A millennium of unchallenged rule. It had all shattered in a single battle. How? His voice barely scraped past his lips. How did they? Chancellor. Grand Strategist Melix forced control into his tone, but the waver was there. We must. The chamber shook. Not from an explosion. Not from enemy fire. From something else. Vectress turned sharply, mandibles clicking. What was that? The war table flickered violently. Systems across the chamber glitched, data streams flooding and then collapsing into corrupted static. Then, the lights died. A single pulse of red emergency glow illuminated the chamber. Then, a voice. Cold. Human. You never understood war. Vectress froze, his blood running to ice. It came from the holodisplay, no, from every device in the chamber. Who is speaking? His words were a snarl, but his fingers curled into the edge of the table. Identify yourself. The voice did not falter. You called yourselves gods. You built your empire on the graves of the forgotten. And yet, when war finally comes for you, you cower. The war chamber cracked open. A soundless rupture split through the marble walls, as if reality itself had fractured. And from the darkness, a figure stepped forward. Black armor. A presence that made the air itself feel wrong. A human. Commander Elias Kale. Vectress staggered back. The Grand Strategist choked on his breath. The Imperial Guard raised their plasma rifles, but none of them fired. They couldn't. Their weapons, disarmed. Their muscles, locked. Kale's fingers flexed, a slight movement, and the guards collapsed, their armor screeching as if an invisible force had crushed them. Vectress's chest heaved. Impossible. Kale took another step forward. That word has no meaning anymore. The Grand Strategist's mandibles clicked frantically. How did you breach Imperial security? This chamber is shielded against every known threat, Kale interrupted, voice barely above a whisper. Your problem is that you still believe your knowledge matters. He tilted his head slightly. You don't understand, do you? His presence was suffocating. The room itself felt smaller. The very laws of space, of reality, seemed to distort around him. We didn't invade, Kale continued. We didn't fight through your defenses. He leaned forward slightly. We were already here. Vectress felt it then. A pulse. A shift in reality itself. They had not breached Imperial security. They had not infiltrated the capital. They had always been here. The Grand Strategist's breathing turned ragged. What do you want? Kale's eyes locked onto Vectress. War is not a game of survival, he said, voice steady, controlled. It is a game of memory. The only thing that matters is who is remembered. Vectress felt his chest tighten. This is vengeance. Kale's expression didn't change. No. He took another step forward. This is correction. The room shook again. But this time, it was not a tremor. It was something bigger. The world itself was fading. Vectress felt it. The weight of existence peeling away, the architecture of the capital melting into shadows. The walls, the floor, the sky, all crumbling. The Edrith capital was vanishing. He whipped toward the holodable, desperate to see the planetary data stream. What he saw nearly made him collapse. His world, his entire world, was gone. The planetary readings flickered, showing nothing. No mass. No energy signatures. The homeworld of the Concord had been erased. Vectress's breath hitched. You destroyed. Destroyed? Kale murmured. He exhaled, shaking his head slightly. No. He raised a single hand. A new image flickered to life across the war table. Vectress felt something break in his mind. The capital wasn't destroyed. It was somewhere else. A dead system. A dark void where the laws of physics themselves did not function correctly. You moved it, Vectress whispered, disbelief bleeding into every syllable. Kale simply nodded. I told you. His voice was absolute. You never understood war. The Grand Strategist fell to his knees. The chamber creaked, the last remnants of stability tearing apart at the seams. Kale turned, walking toward the dissolving exit. Wait, Vectress lunged forward, desperation clawing at his chest. Please. Kale paused. Just for a moment. And then he spoke. We were a myth, he said quietly. And now, we are the lesson you will never forget. Vectress screamed. Then, nothing. Across the galaxy, the Concord's citizens looked to the sky. A star that had once held their capital vanished. The Empire fractured in a single instant. And across the void, hidden in the silent abyss, the last transmission from Elias Kale spread to every world, every colony, every fleet. The age of erasure is over. Now, it is our turn to remember you. The age of erasure is over. Now, it is our turn to remember you. The words echoed across every channel, spreading like a virus through the shattered remains of the Concord's network. Broadcast towers hijacked, emergency frequencies overridden, every colony, every outpost, every fleet heard the same message. The myth had become real. The reckoning had begun. In the remnants of the war chamber, High Chancellor Vectress gasped for breath, his claws scraping against the cold floor. The world he had ruled, gone. Stolen, displaced into a void where even light refused to exist. His entire empire, the unbreakable dominion of the Edrith, fractured in a single stroke. The chamber flickered, its structure destabilizing as the very fabric of reality shuddered beneath what had been done. Vectress's mandibles clicked in frantic desperation. We can still recover. His voice wavered, but he forced it steady. We still have control. We can. No, Grand Strategist Melix interrupted, his four eyes wide with something Vectress had never seen in him before. Defeat. Melix's hands trembled as he gestured to the ruined displays, where fragments of fleet formations pulsed with warning indicators. They knew everything. They knew our defenses, our supply chains, our contingency plans, before we even activated them. Vectress bared his fangs. Then we adapt. We still have warships, we still have. A choke sound escaped Melix's throat. Look again. Vectress turned. His heart froze. Fleet 17? Gone. Fleet 84? Gone. Fleet 130? Gone. The war map bled red, entire sectors consumed in the wake of an enemy that did not fight like an enemy. There were no contested zones, no battlefields, no fronts. There was only erasure. They don't fight for control, Melix whispered. His voice was hollow, distant. They fight to end us. Vectress slammed his fist against the table. Then we end them first. His eyes flicked to the last remaining fleet beacon still active. The Exodus Armada. Melix's breath caught. You can't be serious. Vectress straightened, his voice a razor of authority. I will not let the last 1,000 years burn because of a resurrected nightmare. Melix's mandibles twitched, his eyes darting between the blinking red beacons. That's exactly what you don't understand. It's already burned. He gestured wildly to the holodisplay. There's no surrender. No negotiation. No retreat. They aren't making demands. They aren't sending terms. They're rewriting reality itself. The words struck deeper than any blade. For all his years of power, for all his centuries of dominion, Vectress had never faced an enemy like this. Not warriors. Not conquerors. A force of nature. His claws curled into his palm. Then we used the last option. Melix inhaled sharply. No. Vectress's gaze darkened. We detonate the Singularity Core. Silence. Melix stared at him in horror. That would annihilate half the sector. Vectress stepped forward. Better half than all. Melix shook his head, his breath ragged. That device was built as a last resort, to collapse the very fabric of space-time. If we trigger it, the entire Concord will cease to exist if we do nothing, Vectress snapped. You said it yourself. There is no retreat. There is no surrender. Then let them burn with us. A heavy pause settled between them. Then, the lights died. Not an explosion. Not an attack. Just a quiet, absolute absence. The last glow of the war table flickered out. The emergency sirens fell silent. The distant hum of the Capitol's core reactors, gone. And then, the voice. You still believe you have a choice. The words crawled through the darkness, weaving through the chamber like a specter. Vectress's claws flexed instinctively, but he could not see. No walls. No displays. No emergency systems. Just an endless black void. A single set of footsteps echoed through the abyss. Slow. Measured. Then, Elias Kale's voice. You think because you ruled the stars, they belong to you, Kale said softly. But the truth is much simpler. Vectress felt something twist in his chest, a pressure heavier than any gravity he had known. He couldn't breathe. Couldn't move. The stars remember, Chancellor, Kale continued. They remember the voices that screamed before they were erased. The names that were forgotten. The worlds you turned to dust. A cold, metallic touch pressed against Vectress's temple. Now, they will remember you. A sudden pulse of energy ripped through the void, and light returned. Vectress stumbled back, gasping. The chamber was intact. The war table flickered, power restored, but the holomap was different. The Concord's empire? It was gone. Vectress's breath came in ragged gasps. You, his voice failed. Kale stood before him, unshaken. Unrelenting. "We didn't conquer you," he said. "We didn't invade." His lips curled slightly. "We erased the concept of you." Vectress trembled. "That's not possible." Kale's eyes were cold. "Neither were we." The war table shifted again. A new map flickered into view. Not a battle plan. Not a military formation. A list. Worlds once erased. Civilizations once lost. Names stolen from history. Restored. The archive of 1,000 forgotten races, now returned. Vectress could barely whisper. What have you done?" Kale exhaled, stepping forward. "We changed the rules." The chamber shuddered one last time, and for a fleeting second, Vectress saw it, the collapse of an empire. Not through war. Not through conquest. Through remembrance. The moment the galaxy knew the truth, the Concord ceased to exist. The moment history was restored, the foundation of their power collapsed. Vectress's vision swam. The room blurred. His mind reeled under the weight of it all. Kale turned his back to him. "You were never gods," he murmured. "You were just another lie." The war chamber's doors slid open, revealing the endless night beyond. Kale stepped through. No alarms. No guards. Just silence. As Vectress dropped to his knees, the final transmission pulsed across the galaxy. A single phrase. A whisper from the abyss. "We were just a myth. Now, we are the truth." We were just a myth. Now, we are the truth. The message rang across the remnants of the Concord's empire. The words infected every system, every outpost, every fleet that had once believed in their own invincibility. The illusion had shattered. The fear had set in. The High Council was in ruins. Every remaining fleet command struggled for control, but there was none left to grasp. The Edrith had ruled through certainty, through absolute belief in their eternal reign. But now, uncertainty reigned. Chancellor Vectress sat in the darkness of what remained of the war chamber, his breathing ragged. The air was heavy with the weight of something he had never felt before. Not just defeat. Not just collapse. Irrelevance. They had always believed in their own permanence. The Concord had shaped reality, rewritten history, erased entire species from existence. Now, they were the ones being erased. A transmission pulsed through the last active console. His mandibles twitched, but he didn't move. He already knew who it was. Elias Kale's voice was calm. "This is the last conversation your kind will ever have." Vectress exhaled shakily. "If we were nothing, you wouldn't be here," he whispered. "If you were truly beyond us, this would have ended in silence." Kale's voice did not waver. "Silence is coming. But before that, understanding." Vectress clenched his claws. "Understanding?" His laugh was dry, bitter. "You slaughtered us without warning. You never gave us a chance to fight." "You were given a chance," Kale replied smoothly. "You were given thousands of years to make a choice. And every time, you chose erasure." Vectress's gaze dropped to the flickering screen before him. The galaxy had changed in a matter of hours. It no longer belonged to the Concord. It no longer belonged to anyone. The names of species thought lost had reappeared. Memories restored. Histories rewritten back into existence. "You still believe in empire," Kale continued. "You still believe power is measured in fleets and rulers. You don't understand." Vectress's throat tightened. "Then tell me." Kale was silent for a moment. "Then, this is the last lesson you will ever learn." The chamber shook. Vectress lurched forward, claws gripping the edge of the console as the entire station groaned. He could feel it, not just an attack, not just destruction. Something deeper. "Your existence," Kale said, his voice almost gentle, "was built on the graves of those you erased. You built your throne on stolen time, on stolen voices. That time has run out. Vectress tried to speak, but the air itself seemed to collapse around him. The walls flickered, the space outside the viewport distorted. Kale's voice never changed. You will not be conquered. You will not be destroyed. You will simply become what you made of us. A crack ran through the war table, deep and jagged, as the lights began to fade, not just in the chamber, but in reality itself. Vectress gasped. What are you? Kale exhaled. You made yourselves gods. The station fractured. Not in fire. Not in explosion. In silence. Reality peeled away. Vectress saw it, the unraveling. The Edrith had done this to others before, had watched entire civilizations collapse into nothingness. They had ruled through this method. They had thought themselves above it. Now, it was happening to them. The Concord's existence was no longer real. Not because they had been destroyed. Not because they had been beaten. But because they were being forgotten. The names of their leaders, their warlords, their conquests, all fading. The records wiped. The memories erased. They had spent thousands of years ensuring no trace of their enemies remained. Now, they were the ones disappearing. Vectress felt his breath grow shallower, his limbs weaker. Kale's voice echoed softly. We could have done this long ago. But we needed you to understand. We needed you to feel it. Vectress's claws trembled. You can't just. Kale exhaled. We can. The final alarm died. The lights faded. The war table collapsed into dust. Vectress's voice failed. His mind failed. His name failed. And then, he was gone. Not dead. Not defeated. Just forgotten. Across the galaxy, the last traces of the Concord vanished. Entire worlds untouched by destruction, but empty. Cities without names. Monuments to no one. History simply moved on. And in the quiet abyss, the final message spread. No threat. No warning. Just a single, simple truth. We were a myth. And now, so are you.